In post-war London, John George High was the picture of sophistication. Immaculately dressed and well-spoken, he appeared to be a successful inventor, someone you could trust. But this charming facade was a mask. It hid a monstrous reality, luring his victims into a false sense of security. Consumed by greed for a life of luxury, Hay saw people not as humans, but as obstacles to their possessions. He viewed murder as a simple business transaction, a chilling reminder that evil can hide in plain sight. John George High earned a sinister nickname, the Acid Bath Murderer. This points to his unique and grotesque method. After luring victims to a secluded workshop, he placed their bodies inside 40-gallon drums and poured in sulfuric acid. He believed, with chilling certainty, that this would leave no trace. He thought, if there was no body, there could be no murder charge, a fatal flaw born from a twisted reading of the law. John George High was born in 1909 to deeply religious parents. His childhood was one of extreme isolation, confined behind a high fence his father built to keep the sinful world out. Raised on a constant diet of fear and guilt, Hay was taught that he was inherently wicked. This dark upbringing manifested in a recurring nightmare, a forest of crucifixes that transformed into trees dripping blood. He learned to live a double life, hiding a mind preoccupied with blood and sacrifice. As John High entered his teenage years, his strict religious upbringing had the opposite effect, making him crave luxury. At 21, he was caught embezzling funds, a turning point that set a pattern of fraud. He became very good at forging documents to cover his tracks. In 1934, just months after marrying, High was arrested and sentenced to prison for fraud. His wife left him, and his parents disowned him. Now, truly alone, prison did not reform High, it only hardened his resolve. After his first prison sentence, John High emerged a more ambitious fraudster. He set up a fake solicitor's office, selling fraudulent stocks and properties. But his success was short-lived. In 1937, he was arrested again and sentenced to 4 years. In prison, his thinking turned darker. He saw his victims as a liability they could testify against him. He began to learn about the effects of acid on the human body. John High became obsessed with committing the perfect crime by leaving no trace. At his workshop in Crawley, his laboratory of death, he gathered 40-gallon drums and gallons of sulfuric acid. He tested his gruesome theory on a mouse, watching it dissolve completely in minutes. His method proven, he began scouting London's social circles for a prosperous, isolated individual to become the first subject in his horrifying human experiments. The first person to fall into John High's deadly trap was a former employer, a wealthy man named William McSwan. High had worked for McSwan in the 1930s, managing his amusement arcades. They had maintained a friendly, if distant, relationship. When High re-entered McSwan's life after the war, he presented himself as a successful inventor. He knew McSwan had a considerable fortune and that his parents were elderly and unlikely to question his whereabouts. McSwan represented the perfect test case. He was wealthy, trusting, relatively unattached. On a September day in 1944, High lured McSwan to his workshop on Leopold Road. He likely used the pretext of showing an invention or discussing a lucrative business deal. Inside the cluttered, dimly lit space, High's charming facade dropped away. He struck McSwan over the head with a blunt object. That was only the preliminary step. The part his twisted mind considered the real work was about to begin. He lifted McSwan's body and forced it into a large steel drum. With the body inside, High began the macabre process he'd rehearsed. Donning protective gear, he carefully poured concentrated sulfuric acid over the remains, the workshop filled with noxious fumes and the sounds of a violent chemical reaction. Over 2 days he periodically checked the drum, adding more acid until a thick, dark, viscous sludge remained. Once dissolution was complete, he poured the sludge onto a patch of earth behind the workshop, believing he'd erased every trace. Free to act, he began seizing McSwan's assets. He forged documents to control properties, sold possessions, and emptied bank accounts, collecting a small fortune. He wrote forged letters to McSwan's parents. He pretended to be their son, hiding to avoid military service. For a while, the deception worked. High had committed murder, erased the body, and profited, convinced he'd found the perfect crime. With William McSwan's murder, John High established a ghastly pattern. When the money ran out, his greed drove him to his next victims, William's elderly parents. Using deceptive charm, he assured them their son was safe, luring them to his workshop with the promise of a reunion. There, he murdered them and dissolved their bodies in acid. High plundered their wealth, moving into the prestigious Onslow Court Hotel. But by 1947, his lavish spending depleted the funds, and the predatory cycle was set to begin again. John High's finances were dwindling. He needed new victims to fund his extravagant lifestyle. He targeted a wealthy couple living in the same hotel, Dr. Archibald Henderson and his wife, Rosalie. He learned they were interested in property and invented a fraudulent business opportunity to lure them in. In February 1949, John High put his plan into motion, inviting Dr. Henderson to his workshop in Crawley. Once inside, High shot Dr. Henderson and dissolved his body in a drum of sulfuric acid. He then returned to the hotel, telling Mrs. Henderson her husband was ill. She trusted High and went with him, only to meet the same grim fate. With the Hendersons gone, High stole their valuables and began liquidating their assets, confident he had committed the perfect crime. John Hay's arrogance had grown with each murder. He believed dissolving bodies in acid made him untouchable. But when the Henderson couple vanished, their friend Constance Lane grew suspicious and went to the police. During questioning, Hay made his fatal error. Believing that without a body, police had no case, he made a shocking confession. He told stunned detectives, "Mrs. Henderson is not missing. She's dead." He then smugly added, "How can you prove murder if there is no body?" Following John High's arrogant confession, detectives were dispatched to his workshop at Leopold Road. Inside, they found a scene confirming their worst fears: 40-gallon drums, rubber aprons, and a revolver belonging to Dr. Henderson. But High was certain the acid had destroyed everything, leaving no proof of his victims. The investigation expanded to the yard behind the workshop, a patch of greasy, stained earth. A team of forensic experts began the painstaking task of sifting through the chemical sludge, hoping to uncover what High was convinced they would never find. The forensic investigation was placed in the capable hands of Dr. Keith Simpson, a brilliant and renowned pathologist. He understood High's belief that acid would completely destroy a body was fundamentally flawed. Sulfuric acid is incredibly corrosive, but it does not dissolve everything at the same rate: bone, gallstones, plastic. Simpson theorized any remains would be in the sludge High discarded. Back at the lab, the team began the grim, methodical sifting. They rinsed the sludge through fine sieves, painstakingly washing away dirt and chemical residue. It was slow and nauseating, but persistence paid off. The first piece of evidence, a small, whitish object like a stone. Closer inspection, a human gallstone. A breakthrough, a gallstone links to an individual's medical history. High's perfect crime began to unravel. Discoveries continued. More human remains appeared. 28 pounds of human body fat saponified into a waxy substance. Then, fragments of human bone. Small, eroded, unmistakably human. The most significant, a piece of hip bone, identified as female. The perfect crime was far from perfect. The most conclusive discovery came from Dr. Simpson. While examining sludge, he found something small and plastic. After cleaning it, a set of dentures. Intact, slightly discolored by acid. Police knew Rosalie Henderson wore dentures and found her dentist. He positively identified them from records, confirming they belonged to Mrs. Henderson. Irrefutable proof. With the discovery of the gallstones, the bone fragments, and Rosalie Henderson's dentures, the police now possessed the corpus delicti John Hay believed he had destroyed. His misunderstanding of the law was laid bare. Corpus delicti doesn't require a complete corpse. It requires proof a crime occurred and that the accused is responsible. Forensic evidence from the sludge at Leopold Road provided that proof. The partial remains dismantled High's claim of an untraceable method. The evidence against him became overwhelming. The police had his confession and it was corroborated by powerful physical evidence. Revolver stolen from Dr. Henderson, found in High's workshop. Forged documents used to sell the Hendersons' property and car. Pawnbroker receipt for Rosalie Henderson's fur coat. Parts of her actual body. Each piece was another nail in the coffin of his freedom. Faced with this mountain of evidence, his legal strategy shifted. His no body, no crime defense failed, so he and his lawyers pleaded insanity. High described blood-drinking dreams since childhood. He told psychiatrists he killed for money, then drank a glass of his victims' blood after each murder before dissolving them in acid. He hoped this vampiric tale would sway a jury. The prosecution countered with a different portrait. They presented High as a methodical, greedy con artist. His careful planning, his forgeries, his immediate attempts to profit, all pointed to cold-hearted avarice, not insanity. The blood story was seen as a desperate ploy. The stage was set for a trial to captivate and horrify the nation. The trial of John George High began in July 1949, gripping a nation. Was he a madman driven by blood-centric delusions, as his defense claimed? Or a cold, greedy killer, as the prosecution argued? The prosecution presented Hay's actions after the murders, forging documents, selling property as the calculated work of a rational mind focused on profit. It took the jury just 17 minutes to agree. Found guilty, Hay was sentenced to death, his plea of insanity utterly rejected. John George High was executed in 1949, but the story of the acid bath murderer has endured, leaving a dark and lasting legacy. His case famously debunked the no body, no crime myth, establishing that a murder conviction could be secured with sufficient forensic evidence. A chilling reminder that evil can wear a respectable mask. High used charm to lure victims, seeing them as mere stepping stones to a life of luxury, driven by a fatal arrogance. Come back for more chills, haunts, murder, and mystery. Share this video with family and friends. Please like and subscribe.